Good morning, everyone. Hope everyone's doing well. Again, thank you for getting the homework sent in. Some really good stuff there, so well done. Okay, so what we're going to be looking at is the diversity of organisms, and it's also known as the 5 kingdoms of life. Okay. All right, so if you can have a new page kind of ready for your notes, and you can stop me wherever you can to take some notes. I'll let you know what you need. Okay, so the 5 kingdoms of life. So we need to know the 5 kingdoms of life to classify plants and animals, discuss the plant kingdom with flowering plant as an example, and discuss the animal kingdom with the human as an example. Okay, so this throughout biology we're going to be doing a lot of. The structure of plants, how they reproduce, same thing with humans and all the systems that are involved in humans. This is an introductory chapter to the other 3, so we're going to just introduce it in this chapter, kind of get some common features, then look at those 3 in detail, and you'll find out the names now soon. Okay, so this is a classification video that I'm going to post in the comments. If you're watching it, I'd recommend to do that. Skip to 4 minutes. The start is just a little bit on the American system, and you know yourself with these videos, sometimes they don't match exactly what we need, but yeah, it's a good one just to show you how they classified animals, plants and other organisms. Okay, so this is classification, and if you're a taxonomist, you're a scientist who studies classification. So if there's a new species that's found, it would be your job to put it into the right section. Okay, so taxonomy is a key definition you need. It's the study of classification. So let's have a look. Like the smallest area you have is a species. So this would be the most specific. So in this case here we have the American black bear, and this bear over here is in the black bear species, and a species is something that has the ability to reproduce fertile offspring. Okay, so all the black bears together would be known as the black bear species because they can reproduce with each other to make more black bears, basically. All right, and then there's subcategories after that, and they are the genus, the family, the order, class, phylum, kingdom, domain, basically, right? So what that means is here we have some common factors, some very similar genes here, for example. So these 3 bears here, the brown bear, the polar bear and the black bear, all obviously have very, very similar genes. Then they're in the family of bears as a whole, for example. Alright, so you have polar bears. I actually don't really know what that one is. It looks like some other type of bear. So on, and it just goes on like that until it gets to the very end, which is the domain, and that's called the eukarya, or the eukaryotes. And if you remember, the eukaryotes are organisms that have membrane-bound organelles. So they have like mitochondria with a membrane around it. They'd have a nucleus with a membrane around it, etc. So all of these are in that domain. Then we have underneath that the animal domain. So in the animal domain, there's no plants, whereas you can see here there's some plants here in the eukaryote domain, for example. Okay, so that's how they order it when they find a new species, and that's called taxonomy. Okay, so old systems of classification were based on separating life into 2 categories only. These are animals and plants, and the reason for that is if they find a new species, they check to see if it had a cell wall, and if it had a cell wall, okay, yeah, animal. If it didn't, if it had a cell wall, plant. If it didn't, animal. Okay, that was the old system. So they used to only think that there was only just plants and animals, but we now know that there's now an updated 5 kingdom system with a few more categories. So with developments of science came the discovery of new forms of life. So what that means is, because now we have microscopes that are really high powered, we've discovered microorganisms, and they're definitely neither animals or plants. So that's why this new system came in. So a more updated 5 kingdom system was proposed. It has since gained widespread acceptance by the scientific community. Okay. So here we go. Here's the 5 kingdom system of classification. So life on Earth can be divided up into 5 kingdoms. Sometimes you'll see a 6 if you go reading about it, but 5 is the one that kind of is most accepted. Okay, so we have Monera here, and we're going to be looking at those in detail on their own. That's a bacteria type chapter and type organism. Then we have Protista. We've learned a little bit about that before. Protists are kind of things like amoeba and algae and seaweed and things like that. Fungi, I'm sure you've heard about before, is mushrooms, mildews, molds, things like that. That's in the fungi chapter, and we'll look at it a little bit in this, but not too much. Then we have our plants, so your trees and shrubs and flowers and things, and then we have the animals. So animals range from humans to you name it, cats, dogs, tigers, whatever. Okay, so there's our 5 kingdoms. If you can take those 5 down, because you'll need to know them as we move on. Okay, so then each of the 5 kingdoms can be further subdivided. So like the bear back in the first slide, we can divide the kingdom into further smaller categories. Each successive category contains organisms that are more and more similar. The final category into which the organisms can be placed is the species, and this is a key definition here. Okay, this is the one that you need here. So species, members of the same species are capable of interbreeding to produce fertile offspring. And we talked about this before, about the mule and the liger, when it's a kind of a cross between 2 organisms. They can they cannot make fertile offspring. Okay, so that would be the issue. Whereas other species, like the American black bear, for example, they have the ability to make fertile offspring, so they're known as the species. Okay, so just to quickly jump back to that so you can see what I mean. So the final category into which organisms can be placed in is a species. So what they would do is, if you find a new organism, you would see, okay, is it in the eukaryotes? Yes. Okay, is it an animal? They check for cell wall, for example. Okay, then they further subdivide it until they get it on its own, and then it would be known as the new species. So there's a good few steps before you kind of call a new animal what you like, or a new species what you like. Okay, so there we have our definition. Here's just another example of how they categorize things. So here we start off with the prokaryotic kingdom. So that's like certain types of bacteria. Then we have protists. Then there's amoeba, for example, is a type of protist. We have algae, things like that. Then we go into the animal kingdom. You have birds, some insects, fish. Then we have the fungus kingdom here. Then we have the plant kingdom and all the different types of plant. Okay, that's just another diagram, just to show you. Okay, so Monera. This kingdom contains about 10,000 identified species of bacteria. And this is a type of one here, a rod one, a rod-shaped bacteria. It is estimated that there are many, many more than the 10,000. Bacteria were the first organisms on Earth, and they are by far the most numerous organism on the planet. Okay, so that's Monera, sometimes known as prokaryotes. Monera is the one. And when you think of Monera, think bacteria. Okay, you don't need any notes here because this is just the introduction. We're going to be looking at Monera in more detail. Now, Monera, main features, they are mainly microscopic and single-cell organisms. They do not have a membrane enclosed nucleus, so inside here there would not be another nucleus that's surrounded by a membrane. They might have a small loop of DNA like that. Some of them will, but they wouldn't have a complex nucleus. They do not have membrane enclosed nucleus. They do not have membrane enclosed organelles such as mitochondria and chloroplast, and they normally reproduce asexually, meaning that if this is the parent bacteria, this will go through asexual reproduction to make another, and we'll look at how that happens in the specific Monera chapter. Okay, so these notes here, I do need to take down under the heading of Monera. Okay, so here's some examples of Monera. You have here, this is like a rod-shaped one with a flagellum, which is the tail. Okay, here's ones here that are just longer, more like spirals, like string. There's the one that we had before, like a rod, and these ones here are well, individually they can be kind of round, but then when you stick some of them together, they become like a spiral, kind of like that one up here. Okay, so that's just some types. Okay, so on to protists next, or protista, and this diagram here is in here for a reason. This green algae is an example of protista. So in the old system, people would just probably thought that this is a plant, whereas it's actually not. It's in the protist family. So this is a really diverse kind of kingdom. There's loads of different types. It even includes plankton as well. So protist contains a wide variety of organisms, from large plant like algae, seaweeds, to single-celled organisms such as amoeba. Protists are found almost anywhere water is present. So here's an example of two types of protists. We have our amoeba, and that's a video there that you can watch. The amoeba we've seen before. Remember, it had the contractile vacuole to release water. It doesn't really have many structures involved here. It just has these loops that double up as a mouth as well as legs. This is the algae type. Looks like plants, but they're actually protists. The algae type organisms there, and they're in the protist family. Okay, so protist main features contain single-celled amoeba and multicellular organisms like algae. They have membrane-enclosed nucleus. Some feed by taking in organic substances. They absorb nutrients through the cell wall, like your amoeba. Others can produce their own food by photosynthesis, like the algae type plant. So they would have chloroplasts and things like that. They are more complex. They do have membrane enclosed organelles. So that's some of their features. Okay, that's for protists. I need you to take down those there, please. Okay, last one is our fungi. So examples of fungi include mushrooms, as we see here, mildews, molds and yeasts. Fungi play a vital role in that they break down dead organisms and allow minerals to be recycled. So we've seen this in the ecology chapter. We've seen that fungi play a vital role in the carbon and nitrogen cycles by breaking down nutrients. So this tree over here is obviously dead, or part of it is dead, and the mushrooms are starting to feed off the dead organic matter. Eventually they'll run out of food and they'll rot into the ground as well and take the nutrients with it. Okay. Also, if this tree didn't have anything growing on it, not many things can eat off it. But with the mushrooms growing, then yes, you can see here there's something on the side of the mushroom starting to eat it. So they are kind of provide animals with food as well. So fungi's main features, they're mainly multicellular, and there's a whole chapter based on fungi and an experiment and all that as well, which hopefully we'll manage to do at some stage. They are composed of threads called hyphae. Okay, and what that means is, say if we have a surface here, say on bread, we'll just say bread mold for example, you have loads of these little threads, and if you look really closely at mold, you'll actually see it. Then the roots go in underneath like that, and they have these round things on the top like that. Okay, but those threads there, because they're so thin, are called hyphae. We'll be looking at those again. A hypha consists of one or more cells surrounded by a tubular cell wall, and cell walls are made of a carbohydrate called chitin. Okay, this is a new word, chitin, chitin, and that's what the carbohydrate is in fungi. Okay, to allow the threads to stand up tall, it needs it. In plants, it's known as cellulose. So the carbohydrate found in fungi, and you can be asked this, is chitin. All right. They're unable to make their own food. Fungi, that means they're saprophytic, which means that they have to feed off dead things really. The method of reproduction involves spores. Okay, so here's some examples. So molds, mildews, yeast, so on. Here you have your kind of yeast type thing, mildews. Then you have your mushrooms, like so. They're all in the fungi kind of category. Okay, last thing then for today. So just to give you an overview, I know it's really fast. We didn't do anything on plants and animals because we'll be doing those throughout the course. But the other three is Monera, Protista and fungi. So Monera are usually bacteria, so round, rod or spiral. Protists or Protista are usually algae type organisms and amoeba. And there's way more, that's just some examples. So loads of these strange things that live in the sea are protists. They tend to be put in the protist family. Then fungi, usually, that should be mold, sorry, I'm going to change that. Mold, mildews and mushrooms, and they have that cell wall, remember, that's made of chitin. Okay, so here's some examples. At the bottom here you have your bread mold, you have some spores that they make. This is a microscopic view of Rhizopus, which is the bread mold, which we'll be studying in the fungi chapter. Here's some really poisonous mushrooms called the death cap, and there's another type of one there as well. Okay, so that's it. Okay, so we'll get into plants and animals the next time. Today, your questions, we're on page 286, or what am I talking about? 236 here. Okay, 236, and our homework, you're going to do 1 to 3, I'll call it. Okay, so 1, 2, 3, and there's a little bit of 3 up here as well. Okay, so this will involve going back and reading through the chapter a little bit, so give that a good go. Okay, thanks guys.